You're watching PowerNation. Today on Detroit Muscle, we pamper the engine bay of our Roadrunner so our Hemi power plant will pop when it's dropped in. And we also get locked and loaded with installing a pistol grip shifter, aiming for maximum Mopar magnificence. Hey guys, welcome to Detroit Muscle. If you're into high-performance Hemis, snatching gears with a pistol grip, and shiny paint, what we have up our sleeve is going to tickle your fancy because this big hunk of Detroit power is going in this thing today. On our Roadrunner, we aren't planning to run a hood on this thing, so a pretty engine bay is a must for our final product. This high-tower Hemi looks impressive. In there, not so much. Joel and I have some work to do. Now, we've done a small amount of disassembly here on the front to help the painting process go a lot faster. Got some of it out of the way. Now, I've also been spending some time kind of assessing our surface, and I've hit what I refer to as a moral dilemma. Now, what needs to happen to do a repair by the book under the hood is all of this material should be removed. Because, well, a lot of this filler, well, for one, has been exposed to the elements for quite some time. Also, the primer that's on here probably come out of a rattle can, and that's usually lacquer-based stuff. But in our situation, check out the rest of the car. It's got patina on it. So what we're gonna do is mow this down with some aggressive paper and then bury some bad decisions in some polyester primer. Then we'll sand that and paint it, and it'll look like $1,000,000. The problem with doing it this way, well, the repair won't last as long as it should. While Joel's finishing up taping, I'm gonna go ahead and get some primer mixed up. Now, what we're gonna be applying is polyester primer. It's more or less a sprayable form of body filler. It mixes 4-to-1. This one's direct to metal. All we gotta do is fill the gun up, we can get to spraying. Well, we let our Roadrunner hang out overnight to make sure that that primer was good and dry, because Joel applied several coats trying to hide a bunch of these fender well uglies. After that, we're gonna do some hand massaging of some 180 grit paper, and then we're gonna seal this thing and paint it. Now, I know a few of you painters out there are probably cringing at the thought of painting over top of 180 grit scratches. Normally, the rule of thumb is 320 dry or 400 wet. But in our application, a patina car, the engine bay, well, this'll work.
It's a bit excessive. There's a big low spot. Had to make sure it's in there. Filled up good.
After a few hours of some quality time with Joel and some sandpaper, we're ready to start applying our first coat of black. It's gonna be some epoxy primer. This will seal off that polyester and help hide some of those scratches left by that 80 grit gnarly paper. Well, everything is all flashed off. Now it's time to spray on the shiny. Well, there you have it. We spent a couple of hours doing some prep, spent a few $100 on some painting supplies, and I have to say, for our investment, we've got a whole lot of return on it. So what do you think?
You know, honestly had been a minute since I laid down any polyester primer, but that stuff laid down smooth, it sanded out clean, and I think the results speak for themselves.
Could be that you're just looking at the side that I sanded. Coming up, if you're pondering a Hemi swap, we'll give you our plan of attack for a late model transplant. Now there's one term that if you own a Mopar that gives you a sense of pride if you can associate it with your car, and that is, it's got a Hemi in it. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to install this late model power plant into our 69 Roadrunner. Doing a conversion like this piques the interest of a lot of folks, but at the same time intimidates the heck out of them because there's quite a bit that can go into this install. So why would somebody want to do something like this? Well, there's a few reasons. Late model power plants usually make more power more efficiently, which translates to longer life, more performance, and even better fuel mileage. This pretty Hemi didn't start off looking like this. We bought this thing out of a salvage yard. I was told it was involved in a friction fire. That's where your pocketbook and payment book get too close together, causing detrimental injury to your vehicle. The guys in Engine Power cleaned this thing up, sprayed on some new paint, threw in a camshaft and some springs, and then locked her down to the dyno to see what it would make. 550 horse ain't too bad.
She ain't going nowhere.
That engine fell right into place, just as smooth as butter, and a lot of that came from the design from Reilly Motorsports, our front suspension setup. And what they did is they located our new engine in the exact same location as a stock like 440 or 383. And what you would want to do to keep in mind if you were going to make your own mounts, and that would be the center line of the crankshaft and the surface where the transmission and engine both meet up. Once you get the engine in place, it may give you a sense of accomplishment, but in all reality, this is where all the work begins, because now you have to take all the operating systems of that engine and make them work in perfect harmony. Kind of like the radiator. A replacement radiator for a 69 Roadrunner has an inlet on the top passenger side and an outlet on the lower driver's side, where our 6.4, both of them are on that side, the passenger. So to make this one connect to that one with a stock unit, you're going to have to be a bit creative, build you a hose, and so forth. There are companies out there that make Hemi conversion radiators with both of them on the same side, which will make your life a whole lot easier. The next thing I want to talk about is your alternator. Now what we're running is a relocation kit that we picked up from Holley. It moves it up and out of the way. From the factory, the alternator would be located in this area, and the problem with it being like that is interference. You'll hit your frame rail. So to try to make a stock piece work, you're going to have to get to slicing and dicing. With that one, it bolts right into place.
And for those of you that have never wrestled with one of these modern engine conversions, one of the hurdles that you will run into is just trying to find an alternator that works with your ECU. Now, lucky for us, Holley has the solution. This setup actually doesn't require the factory Mopar ECU, so it's going to work with whatever engine control system we decide to go with. All you're going to need is a single wire connected directly to the L terminal, which will supply enough juice to spin the alternator and charge your entire electrical system. Which is going to save Tom and I one heck of a headache because this setup actually ties directly into our Terminator X engine control system.
So now let's talk about the subject or category that scares people the most with one of these late model conversions, and that would be the wiring. You have a couple of options. One is you can take the stock wiring harness, cut it down, take out all the stuff you don't need, and then have the ECU reworked. Or you can do like what we did and go with an aftermarket setup. This has some convenience to it. One, each wiring connector comes labeled so you know what goes where. Plus all this has instructions to eliminate guesswork. However, your ECU will require a tune, but if you're one of those guys that can't leave things well enough alone, like swapping in a new cam, headers, intake, and so on, well, that stock tune wouldn't work. We're not going to get into all that right now. We still got a car to build, but I do need to put that intake on to see what this thing looks like. Here, bud, hold half this awkwardness.
I got you. She may be awkward, but man, it looks cool.
Man, yeah, you got velocity stacks, dual quads, a long-legged intake, and a Hemi. We're on to something.
I think we're gonna be upsetting every old lady and dog in the neighborhood by the time we get her hooked up.
Up next, Joel comes through in a clutch, while I'll see if our transmission measures up.
You know, before we even started this build, Tom and I agreed that we wanted this car to make a statement. And man, I gotta tell you, between these fancy billet wheels, this aggressive stance, and that big old nasty tunnel ram sticking out the top, I'd say we're well on our way.
Well, we're going to continue that mindset throughout from front bumper all the way to the back. So that means we're going to have to address a portion right here in the middle. And that would be the feel that you receive while sitting in the driver's seat. The way we plan to enhance that emotion is with a manual transmission. You know, there's just something about the ability to dump the clutch, snatch second gear, and then power shift through the rest of them. This car rode off the assembly line as an automatic. You can tell by that big wide brake pedal, and there's no hole or hump on the transmission tunnel for a shifter to be sticking back through. Now, you know, oftentimes with a ride like this, people don't even consider them a muscle car unless they've got 3 pedals. And how could we build this ride without installing a pistol grip shifter? That was easy. Oh, yep. Oh. Thank you, sir.
Yep. Now that we got the windshield and the dash assembly out of the Roadrunner, I'm going to go ahead and start tearing out that factory brake pedal. Now, believe it or not, it's actually easier to just pull that entire brake pedal assembly out as one complete unit. Basically, you got 5 or 6 bolts up underneath the dash, some extra brackets, some hardware, but I'm going to pull all that out, sandblast them, repaint them, make them look pretty again. Beauty. And just like that, no muss, no fuss, the rust is dust. The factory mounting brackets and hardware are all cleaned up, sandblasted, repainted, and look pretty snazzy bolted up to this clutch and brake pedal assembly we got from Stevens Performance. Now, some of you at home might be wondering why we decided to go with a reproduction assembly instead of a factory original. And the answer, quite simply, is time. I know some guys that have tried doing this conversion at home, and it was not easy. So why put yourself through the headache when Chrysler has already done the engineering work for you? Although this particular Roadrunner didn't come with a manual transmission, a lot of them back in the day did. So you already know the parts are out there. It really just comes down to whether or not you want to spend the extra time and elbow grease sprucing up a factory original part that you pulled out of a junkyard, or if you just want it to bolt right in place when you pull it out of the box. Me personally, I prefer the latter.
A Roadrunner with a stick in it from the factory would have had a 4-speed in it, which is plenty cool, but there's a lot better of an option out there today. With our trans swap, we're going to be adding an overdrive. This piques the interest of quite a few folks because it can make your ride a lot more enjoyable to drive because it dramatically lowers the RPM level when you shift into the extra gear. To do an upgrade like this, there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle to get the job done correctly. There are your obvious parts like your flywheel, pressure plate, and clutch disc, but it's those little pieces that always cause you the most heartache. This ProFit kit that we picked up from American Powertrain saves you all that pain. The centerpiece to this swap is obviously the transmission. We're going to be running a Tremec TKX that our buddies have doctored on. It puts everything in a sweet spot. The shifter isn't so far forward that it slaps the dash or so far back that it's uncomfortable and awkward. Another great thing about these 5-speeds are the physical size. We've got a 727 automatic like what our Roadrunner would have rolled out of the factory with. Now, if you look at the case and the tail housing, you'll notice everything flows together relatively well, and it has a small package, and it's nice and tight to the shaft that runs throughout the middle of the tranny. When you're doing an automatic to manual swap, it can give you the sense that you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and the only way you can get it to work is with some whittling. Now, with that TKX, cutting is mandatory, but it's minimal. Up next, we set our sights on installing Roadburner's gearbox with a wood grain grip that will trip your trigger. The next thing that we need to do is measure from the surface here on the transmission to where this clutch release bearing is going to ride. What we're looking for is 150 thousandths. That's the ideal setup. Technically, the tolerance is between 100 and 200, but that's what we're going for. The first part of the equation we need is the distance from the bell housing to the fingers of the pressure plate. That gives us 3.886. Next, we'll measure the distance from the release bearing to the transmission, which is 3.749. So now let's see where we're at with our two numbers. Well, we're at 137. The sweet spot is 150. That's pretty close. And we really can't get to that 150 number without having to do some machining because there's no shims behind here. The next thing we need to do now is basically cut us a hole for this pistol grip to protrude through that transmission tunnel, and then we can finally put this thing in. So what do you think?
Should fit just fine.
If it won't, we'll just cut a bigger hole.
Correct. To make the cut in the transmission tunnel for our new shifter linkage, I'm going to be using our new flex head reversing cutoff tool we got from Matco. It has a quick action rear reversing collar to help keep sparks away from your face, and a 3-way flex head that can change from a neutral position to 25 degrees up or down to help you get into those hard to reach spots.
Do you think your hole's gonna make it fit into place just right?
I think it's going to be slip right in there like a...
Careful with your words. G-rated show.
I think it's going to fit perfectly.
Ah! So close.
If our old Roadrunner came from the factory with a mechanical clutch assembly, it would have had a bunch of intricate parts to it, kind of like it was designed by some crazy cartoon coyote. It would have had things like Z-bars and rods and springs and all kinds of stuff going every which direction, which is all well and good and worked fine for back in the day, but it did result in some excessive clutch wear, some cramped up legs, and even some broken seat bolt studs. However, American Powertrain's hydraulic clutch assembly makes driving a manual feel less like a labor and more like a luxury. With this setup, every push of the pedal results in direct movement of the clutch and smoother, more responsive shifting. Now that I got the clutch master cylinder bolted in, it's time to go ahead and link it up to the pedal. But before I do that, I need to go ahead and calculate my pedal ratio. This is a commonly overlooked yet super important aspect of the clutch pedal assembly. If your ratio is too deep, you risk slamming the push rod into the guts of the clutch master, causing it to implode. Too shallow, and your clutch won't fully disengage, causing erratic shifting. American Powertrain recommends a 6:1 pedal ratio, and I already know that the distance from my fulcrum to my foot pedal is 12 inches, and from the fulcrum to the push rod is 2 inches, so I'm right in that sweet spot. Now, Tom and I are well aware that a pistol grip shifter wasn't available until 1970, but we just couldn't resist. In my opinion, it's one of the most iconic centerpieces to grace the floorboards of any muscle car in history, and it truly gives a Mopar its menacing personality. Check this thing out. The wood grain side handle rests easily in the palm of your hand, giving you the sensation of holding a .44 Magnum, hence the name, Pistol Grip.
Today has been a pretty good day. We've got quite a bit accomplished. Now, when we kicked it off, well, it wasn't all fun and games. We had to kind of break out a six-pack of some elbow grease. With everything all shined up, we were good to go to drop in that high tower Hemi. And I have to say, that big power plant definitely changes the curb appeal of Road Burner. With that in place, it was time to bolt in the multiplying factor ×5 of the driver's seat, and that would be that overdrive training. Joel, what do you think about that pistol grip?
Man, you want to talk about the cherry on top of the sundae? I think it looks pretty nasty in there. Can't wait to start jamming through some gears on the blacktop.
Yeah, it's probably gonna feel pretty sweet with you over there in the passenger seat.
You mean you're not gonna let me drive?